Either Ukraine will get an alliance like NATO, or it will have to reacquire nuclear weapons. At least this is what we hear from Ukraine, and we'll talk about how realistic it is for Ukraine to reacquire nuclear weapons, while we'll also talk about the developments along the front line in the past few days in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have struck a microelectronics factory in Bryansk. Supposedly that's the only one that is still left being producing microelectronics inside of Russia, and according to reports it is still burning at this very moment. The Russians, on the other hand, are striking back with Shahid drones, and this is an interesting video showing to us how a Ukrainian Hind is chasing a Shahid drone, and as you can see, it managed to shoot it down with its rotary cannon on the so basically intercepting the Shahid and shooting it down. We switch over to the developments along the front line. We'll start off in Kursk as usually. Here we have a geolocation from the 15th, so it's a couple of days old. But on the 15th, the Ukrainians were still in the center of Olgovka, meaning they were up here. Then we had fighting in close to Novoye Vanovka. This is here, right south of it, and by now the Russians have bypassed Novoye Vanovka and are further to the east, close to Malaya Loknia. This means that the Russians have now advanced along the road here. Until roughly this point, they have been operating here, and we have a further geolocation of them being up here. This is at these positions, while we had the Ukrainians still in Olgovka a couple of days ago. This doesn't mean that they are still there at this very moment, but if they are, then increasingly the claims by the Russian mill bloggers that came up after the first Russian successes in these areas here and here, that the claims that they have cut off up to 2 battalions might be true. So as of now, I cannot confirm that Ukrainian soldiers have been cut off, but if Ukrainians are still in Olgovka, it increasingly looks like they might have been cut off. That's the development we have here in Kursk. I cannot confirm any other changes along the front line. We switch over to Kharkiv, and here we have the Ukrainians claiming a success. They claim that they retook the area here, a forested area north of Liptsi. I see Ukrainian maps confirming it, but I have yet to see any geolocation, so this is uncertain from my side whether it's true or not, but the Ukrainians claim that the GOR especially claimed that they recaptured that area. We'll switch over to the eastern front here, and here the Russians have entered deeper into Krylyakivka. This is the town here. Initially, the Ukrainians did a counterattack in the center and managed to push the Ukrainians a little bit further away. This is actually the north, not the center. But now we have a fresh geolocation coming in, showing us that the Russians are in the first houses here as well. Before that, we have seen them in here. So by now the Russians have reached these positions down here, meaning that the north-south connection east of the Oskil River is more or less cut as of now, and it remains cut at this very moment. We'll switch to the south of the Seversky Donetsk because I have no change north of this here, north of the river, other than the situation in Krylyakivka. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we have the Russians north of Verkhnokamianske. They have been geolocated right to its north, which would be roughly at this point. How they have reached there, probably directly from this direction, is unclear, but it shows that the Russians have had some successes here. Whether this is a fresh geolocation or whether the situation has changed hands a little longer is unclear, but we see Russians having some successes in the direction of Siversk. Further south, Chasiv Yar, a significant change here that has happened in Chasiv Yar. The defenses are crumbling. The Ukrainians managed to hold back the Russians on the canal through the eastern part of the town, of the city. And by now the Russians managed to advance significantly inside of Chasiv Yar, pushing the Ukrainians further away here from the eastern part of this quarter of the city. They are reaching further and further to the west, but this isn't all. In the south, they have bypassed it as well and have already reached the mine here. This is on the map. This is actually already here at this point. So the Russians managed to advance like this, and they are advancing into this here, meaning that Chasiv Yar is getting ever more under pressure over the last couple of days. We have pro-Ukrainian maps admitting the loss of territory southeast of Klishivka. If you follow me for longer, I've shown you that the geolocations are far beyond that area. As said, in the end, I cannot talk for them. I can just look at geolocations and at the different maps. I think the Russian control should be extended over what is currently being admitted, but by now the Ukrainians roughly admit that this area has fallen into the Russian hands. Let's switch over to the Toretsk area. Here we have Russian advance in Toretsk itself. We have them spreading a little north here. This is these positions here. Here they are pushing a little bit towards the north, but we have Ukrainian counterattacks at least having some successes. This here is in the this here shows it, and we see the, I'm sorry, this was the wrong map. This here shows the Ukrainians counterattacking in the south, and this is showing them counterattacking here at the connection to the southern area, meaning that while we had geolocations of the Russians here inside of the town, by now we know that the Ukrainians are operating here and here. So the Russians that have been here have likely been repulsed at this point. Or the other hand would be that there's Russian presence still in here, but the Ukrainians seem to be poised or aiming at cutting it off by attacking in these directions. Again, I can only look at the different maps. We see the pro-Ukrainian maps claiming that the whole quarter here is untouched. Even Petrenko only gave the Ukrainians a loss here in the northern part here, whereas we had pro-Russian maps claiming that the whole northern part is already under their control and this whole southern part is contested. It was unclear as of now, but we see that the Ukrainians managed to reach the connection between the two here and are in the south, so the Russians might have been pushed out of the southern part of Toretsk over the past couple of days. West of it in New York, the situation isn't better though. We have the Russians now up here, directly west to that quarter, which shows that the Russians are now at this point. We had the Ukrainians attacking Russians in Leonidivka a couple of roughly 2 or 3 weeks ago. What happened to those is unclear, but we had fighting between Russians and Ukrainians in this area down here. This is now probably an advance along the houses here towards the north, so the contested area should probably be extended to this point as of now, showing that the Russians keep attacking northwards from New York. The Russians have also advanced into the area of Kurachivka. This is in the south here, but I made a mistake with my script. Because Kurachivka is down here, but let's just start at the south, as I already mentioned it. Kurachivka, if we look back here, we see that the whole area here was further extended towards the east. There was a pocket where the Russians were advancing from Krasnohorivka and from the north, slowly pushing the Ukrainians back in this area here. And now we see in the last geolocation that the Russians have reached the south of Shelanedruhe. By now, this meaning they are roughly here at this point. Obviously, they must have come from the north. There's also a geolocation of them roughly at this point, so they could have advanced like this as well. I would guess that the Ukrainians did a withdrawal, which was to be expected at this point. As soon as the towns in the north are being under pressure, it's likely that they have withdrawn further to the west. I do not think that Ukrainians have been cut off in the east here, but we'll see it over the next couple of days. So far, though, the front line has probably switched towards this line here, and the Ukrainians have lost additional territory there. But the Russians have also advanced further in the north. We have the Ukrainians losing additional positions inside of Lysivka. This is directly west of Novorodivka. We see them now here. If you look at the map, we see this is the reservoir here, and the Russians have already advanced over it. So they are at this point roughly now slowly creeping into Lysivka and thus gaining additional ground in the rough direction of Pokrovsk, where Lysivka is one of the towns in front of it. The Russians have also gained additional ground close to Selidove. South here is Selidove, to the southwest of it. This is already here on the map that the Russians have reached this point. We see them trying to cut off Selidove from both sides. So far, the Ukrainians can mostly still hold them back, but the aim is clear and is expressed by Russian mill bloggers as well, that the aim is to cut off Selidove. The pocket down here we already talked about, so we switch over to the area south of it in the direction of Kurakhove, and here Maximilianivka is under big pressure. We have geolocations first of Maximilianivka and the area south of it. The Russians were already in the last third of Maximilianivka, and they had advanced in the south, and right before I started recording, I checked again, and there was a fresh geolocation showing the Russians almost at the end of Maximilianivka. Russian mill bloggers have already claimed that Maximilianivka is taken. As of now, we have the Russians now, I think it was roughly at this point here. I cannot confirm that it is taken, but it seems certain that it's about to be taken. This much seems to be more or less clear as of now. Further south, the Russians have gained a little bit ground here in the west of Vuhledar. Actually down here at this point, they gained some additional ground in the tree line here. Nothing bigger and nothing too significant, but they gained probably total control over Solota Niva, west of Vuhledar, between Vuhledar and Velika Novosilka. As you can see here, we have a geolocation of this as well, with them in the last houses here towards the west. There is still a possibility that there's some Ukrainian presence in the last houses to the west, but the Russians have taken most of the town as well. In the Russians reported, and Ukrainians reported as well, that the Russians had successes in the direction of Levatne. I still have not seen a geolocation of this, but we have seen Russians advancing north of Priutne. As you can see here, there was a motorcycle group of the Russians being struck with cluster munition in this area and suffering severe losses. The Russians operating in this area here, showing that they managed to advance north of Priutne. Now we have visual evidence of this. I do not see any change other than this west of the area, so nothing south of Orikhiv, nothing along the Dnipro. So we switch over to the overall situation. Here we start off with the Kursk region. We have Ukrainian media reporting that the Russians now have a 1-5 superiority in the Kursk region. Lately, the talking points were that the Russians have crossed 50,000 men, which would indicate that the Ukrainians right now are holding Kursk with only 10,000 men. But the soldiers reporting from there are talking about communication problems. Positions are cut off in regards to communication for several days at times. They don't know why. Positions along the front line are relying on their comrades to each flank for protecting them, while those are withdrawing and thus creating the risk of being cut off. And we have to, in this regard, it fits what we've recently had, the execution of Ukrainian prisoners of war in this region, where a drone unit was overrun by the Russians, apparently assuming that they still had infantry in front of them to protect them, but they were taken by the Russians and then executed. This would fit in the overall situation there, whether it's because of improved Russian electronic warfare or whatever the reason is not mentioned here, but we see that the Ukrainians have increasingly telling us problems from the Kursk region. In the Liman direction, we have Konstantin Mashkovets, a former colonel in the Ukrainian armed forces. He's saying in the Liman direction, the Russians are concentrating troops and reorganizing them for planned future attacks. Apart from the troops along the front line that are reorganized for assaults, including building up of mechanized formations, the Russians currently have a reserve of 7,000 men in this region. Whether that's enough to reach Liman is a different story, but it shows us that there must be a plan for a bigger operation west of the Sherebets River that is down here. So we should expect in the coming weeks and months for the Russians to attack further to the west in the rough Liman direction here. Then we have to talk about nuclear weapons. Zelensky said for the security, Ukraine will either need an alliance like NATO, which has proven to be the most effective alliance in the world right now, or Ukraine will need nuclear weapons. This has been misunderstood to a certain degree, and he made sure that he's saying they are not currently thinking about acquiring nuclear weapons, obviously, because this could cause a big ruckus. This could cause problems. The German tabloid Bild has reported that a Ukrainian official that is responsible for the acquisition of weapons told them a few months ago already that Ukraine could have the nuclear weapon within just a few weeks. Zelensky and the foreign ministry have refuted that, I think is the correct word. They said it's not true. And from my understanding, Ukraine's remaining nuclear power plants are under surveillance of the EIEA, so that Ukraine is able to take out plutonium for nuclear weapons without the surveillance being removed. Seems to be impossible because it's designed to be impossible. So that Ukraine can secretly acquire nuclear weapons seems very unlikely at this very moment. And if they demand that the International Atomic Energy Agency is withdrawing from those nuclear power plants, then obviously everyone will know what the reason for this is, and the Russians will know about this as well. They would have warning time and would react on this. But while it seems highly unlikely that Ukraine will or can acquire nuclear weapons in secret, we have to say the historic context at least. Ukraine has handed over its last nuclear weapon in 2001 to the Russians against the guarantee for its territorial integrity, according to the Budapest Memorandum, which was signed by Russia as well, guaranteeing that Ukraine will keep its territorial integrity, and other nations have been signatories as well. For instance, France, Britain, and the United States as well. All of them have basically agreed that Ukraine will hand over its nuclear weapon in exchange for territorial integrity. So if there was ever a moral justification for a country to acquire nuclear weapons, then this would probably be it. Ukraine was one of the biggest nuclear powers in the world after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and now they have given it up against guarantees that turned out to be useless. Ukraine should have the knowledge for miniaturization, and they should probably have the knowledge for the primary explosives. Plutonium is usually being fired off as it's by creating a ball out of non-critical plutonium that is then compressed by blowing up explosives around it at the very exact moment to prevent pancaking. So the bowl is compressed very closely, and the decreased distance of the cores of the plutonium isotopes will then create a chain reaction that will then cause the nuclear detonation. Ukraine should be able to do that. They should be able to build it, and they should be able to build nuclear weapons small enough that they can fit on cruise missiles and on ballistic missiles. But again, while they might technically be capable of doing while they might technically have nuclear power plants that could breed plutonium, from my understanding, it seems highly unlikely that they will able to do so in secret. Troop generation, we have news about North Korea. I made a video about this yesterday, a quick video about this as well. The South Korean intelligence has confirmed that the North Koreans have sent soldiers. In total, it's being said that 12,000 men are being sent to Russia to create several brigades, 4 brigades in total, to fight, to be used by the Russians. Among them are 1,500 special forces. They, according to the reports, they have received fake IDs claiming that they are from Buryatia or Sakha, so basically the East Asian parts of Russia, which would explain how their looks, claiming that they are actually Russians. Budanov, the Ukrainian head of the military intelligence, GUR, is saying that 2,600 of them will be used in Kursk. Whatever happens to the rest is unclear as of now. This is a clear escalation. And while the North Koreans do not have combat experience, we should not underestimate it. They have soldiers, or they can send soldiers that have regular training. On both sides of this war, the vast majority of the soldiers have massively reduced training by now. Their expertise in soldiery is limited simply due to the fact that they have to be sent to the front line fast. And in theory, at least, the North Koreans can have well-trained personnel. Whether that turns out to be the case will obviously be decided in the future, but it would be wrong to dismiss them at this very point. We'll have to see how it turns out, how the effect will be. They might just operate as trainers. They could, for instance, help train additional Russian recruits. They could help operate special equipment, but we'll have to see. The Russians are doing other things too, though. Here it shows that the Russians have started building very cheap drones that are being sent into Ukraine, and they are being equipped with Lüneburg lenses. Lüneburg lens is as you see here, a bowl that has something reflective at the bottom, and it's designed to collect as much radar waves as possible and send it back exactly where it came from, thus increasing the radar signature of an object. This is something that is being used, something similar to this internationally, by nations that own stealth fighters in times of peace, simply to hide the actual effectiveness of their stealth equipment. But we see here that the Russians use this to create bigger targets on Ukrainian radar screens, probably hoping that the Ukrainians will use expensive and rare air defense missiles against those drones that have been produced very cheaply. And speaking of air defense, Ukraine will receive more. The US have announced additional aid, 425 million in total. It includes air defense, it includes air-to-ground munitions and armored vehicles, among anti-tank weapons and much more. In total, the number is, I read that it's actually 2,000 Humvees in addition to other armored fighting vehicles that will be given to Ukraine. Germany has handed over 8 Leopard 1s, 20 Marder IFVs, 2 TRML-4D radar systems, 4,000 attack drones, an Iris-T SLM and an Iris-T SLS system, and the Netherlands have ordered 6 additional DITA howitzers in the Czech Republic to be given to Ukraine as well. So while the West is aiding Ukraine with additional weaponry, the North Koreans are sending soldiers. What do you think about the current developments, and what do you think how the West should react to the North Koreans getting involved in this war? Write it in the comment sections. If you like this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. And this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.